Have you ever just stopped and wondered, how do you actually know all the stuff you know? It sounds like a simple question, but it's one of the biggest questions in all of philosophy. So let's unpack one of the most powerful ways we build our entire picture of reality.
Okay, think about this for a second. How do you know your morning coffee is hot? Well, you feel the warmth of the mug in your hands, right? You can see the steam rising from it. Maybe you take a tiny sip and, yep, your tongue immediately confirms it. Your senses are doing all the work.
Now, what about this one? How do you know a square has four sides? You don't need to go out with a ruler and measure every square you can find. You just know. It's part of the definition of the word square. It's a totally different kind of knowing, isn't it?
Those two simple questions actually show us the two main roads our minds travel to figure out what's true. One road goes through the world around us, and the other stays right inside our own heads, working with logic.
So, these two paths have some official names, and getting a handle on them is key. We're talking about the classic philosophical showdown, reason versus experience. Now, philosophers have some fancy Latin terms for these, a posteriori and a priori. A posteriori is knowledge that comes after experience. Just think post-experience. A priori is the opposite. It comes before experience from reason alone. In this explainer, we're really going to focus on that first one, all the amazing stuff we learn just by living and observing the world. So, the bottom line is this. A posteriori knowledge, which is also called empirical knowledge, is basically any fact you know that relies on your senses. It's stuff you can only know by seeing, hearing, touching, tasting, or smelling. It's the show me the evidence type of knowledge.
And that's the polar opposite of a priori knowledge. You don't need to run an experiment to know that the square root of 9 is 3. It's just true by pure logic. Keeping this contrast in your mind is really the secret to understanding what makes empirical knowledge so special and so powerful.
Okay, so we've nailed down that this knowledge comes from experience. But where exactly does that experience come from? What are the channels it flows through?
Well, it pretty much boils down to two main sources. First, there's perception. That's you using your senses to learn about the world outside your head, like knowing the sky is blue. And second, there's introspection. That's your awareness of your own inner world, like knowing you feel happy. Both are incredibly powerful forms of direct experience.
Now this is where it gets really interesting. The kind of truth that empirical knowledge gives us is totally different. We're not talking about abstract definitions from a dictionary, we're talking about discovering real, solid facts about the world we actually live in.
And this brings us to another key distinction, synthetic truths versus analytic truths. An analytic truth, like a bachelor is unmarried, is true just by definition. The answer is baked right into the words. But a synthetic truth, like snow is white, well, you have to actually go out and look at snow to confirm that. And that's the playground for a posteriori knowledge. It's all about discovering these synthetic truths about how the world works.
So how do we go from just a few observations to these big, sweeping conclusions, like scientific laws? We use a tool called inductive reasoning. Imagine you see one white swan. Then you see another. After you see 100, or maybe 1,000, you start to form a general rule. Hey, maybe all swans are white. That simple process is the engine of all of science.
But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Inductive reasoning gives us powerful, really good reasons to believe things, but it's not ironclad proof. Your conclusion that all swans are white seems solid until that one day you see a black swan. And just like that, the theory has to change. This is exactly why scientific knowledge is so amazing. It's always open to getting better with new evidence.
Okay, so far this seems pretty straightforward, right? Experience gives us truths about the world, truths that could have been different. But now, get ready for a fascinating twist that really complicates things in the best way.
Let's take a simple fact, one we all learned in science class. Water is H2O. Sounds like a classic piece of knowledge we gained from experience, doesn't it? But if we look a little closer, a really cool puzzle starts to appear.
Think about it. How do we know water is H2O? Well, through decades of scientific experiments, a classic a posteriori process. But here's the twist. Could water be anything else and still be water? No way. Being H2O is essential to what water is. So we've ended up with a truth that feels absolutely necessary, kind of like a math equation, but we could only discover it by going out and studying the world.
Philosophers call these empirical necessary truths, and they were a total game changer. They completely challenged the old idea that necessary truths could only be figured out from an armchair with logic. It turns out, Science can actually go out and discover things about our universe that must be true.
So, yeah, this is a cool philosophical puzzle, but why does it actually matter in the real world? Let's take a look at how this whole distinction plays out in science, in debates about morality, and even in your own life.
Well, it turns out a posteriori knowledge is the absolute bedrock of huge parts of our lives. The entire scientific method is built on it. You make a guess, you run an experiment, you observe what happens. The study of history relies on looking at evidence and records. And your everyday life, from knowing that fire is hot to knowing your own height, is just a constant stream of empirical learning.
It even shapes how we think about something as deep as morality. A utilitarian, for example, believes we figure out right and wrong by observing what actions cause the most happiness in the world. That's a totally a posteriori approach. But that's the polar opposite of a Kantian, who would argue that moral laws are universal and can be figured out with pure reason, an a priori method, no matter what the consequences are.
So let's bring all this back home. What's the big takeaway from all of this? I think it comes down to the incredible, and maybe overlooked, power of simply paying attention to the world around you. The vast majority of what you call knowledge, from the deepest laws of physics to the simple fact of knowing who your friends are, is built piece by piece, observation by observation. You are actively constructing your understanding of reality every single day, just by experiencing it.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of tough question to think about. We know our senses can be fooled. We know that our best scientific conclusions could be overturned tomorrow with new evidence. So knowing all that, what's one thing you know purely from experience that feels as certain to you as knowing that 2 + 2 = 4? The answer might just tell you a lot about what knowledge really means